George has been talking recently about Winds of Winter, and with talking about that, he also slammed D&D. So, I want to talk about his most recent interviews. If you enjoy this channel, please consider donating to my Patreon, where you get exclusive content, including the Witcher books breakdowns, podcasts that are only going up on Patreon, early access to videos, and my Patreon-only Facebook group, link in the video description down below. So first, and I think what most people want to hear, so with the Chicago Way, George did an interview with John Cass, and John tried to get him to criticize D&D, which didn't work, but as I go through this video, you'll see he did actually slam them, but in this most recent interview, he kind of step-sided it when John asked, "Aren't you upset with how the final season of Game of Thrones went?" And George replied, "I'm not going to comment on that. They're two different forms of the same story. When I finish my books, read them, but other than that, that's not something I want to get into." So he skillfully step-sided that for bashing D&D, but again, we'll get into later in this video where he did actually bash them a little bit. And you also have to realize from George's perspective why people keep going, why aren't you talking about the final season? Why aren't you being critical of it? Blah, blah, blah. George has a lot of projects and deals with HBO, and he does not want to burn that bridge. So I understand people maybe being disappointed that he's not being more open about it. He's still saying some stuff, but not as critical as people want. He can't. He has so many projects with HBO, and they've already yelled at him before for mouthing off, and he was very bitter about that. So they probably tell George, shut your fucking mouth, and George has to listen. He's not always happy about it, as he sometimes rants about, but, you know, they're writing the checks, and George wants all his amazing worlds to come alive on television, so he has to go along with it. But if you are worried about the books, the last two books being the same as the show, George did about a week ago comment on that. I made a video about it, but I never released it because I don't know, I sometimes make entire videos and never release them for whatever reason. But here's George's comment about how different the books are going to be from the show. So he said, "It can be traumatic, because sometimes their creative vision and your creative vision don't match, and you get the famous creative differences thing. That leads to a lot of conflict. The final series has been not completely faithful. Otherwise, it would have to run another 5 seasons. You get totally extra things like the studio or the network weighing in, and they have some particular things that has nothing to do with the story, but relates to, well, this character has a very high Q rating, so let's give him a lot more stuff to do." So I still think this goes along with George saying, hey, I gave them the destinations, but the journey is going to be very different. As he said before, there are characters alive in the show that are dead in the books, and there are characters that are dead in the show that will stay alive in the books to the very end. And this is kind of an interview where he said, yeah, I'm a little disappointed that D&D didn't follow it exactly, but this is what it is, and I understand it wasn't 100% them. It was also the network saying, hey, such as Bronn, this guy's super popular. We need to have him in more shit, even when it didn't make sense and it became the Bronn show. And I say that, but every time I do, people go, well, I loved Bronn. I loved how much he was in it. And that's fine. And that's why he was in it more, because people like you liked him. That's television. It's fine. I didn't like how much Bronn was shoehorned in, but you gotta go with those ratings. Gotta get that money. And that quote does say, hey, I'm not 100% happy with what D&D did, but I'm not gonna throw them completely under the bus because I still have a lot of projects and deals with HBO, and it's just not worth it. Though he has expressed many times he's disappointed with how the show ended, but he's being a bit more clever about it. Next, and I love this quote by George because it just reminds me of the tortured artist. So he talked about how overpowering finishing the A Song of Ice and Fire series can be, saying, "If my writing is going well and I'm really in Westeros, it does haunt me day and night. I'm laying there in bed, I'm waiting to go to sleep, the lights are out, and the scenes that I'm gonna write tomorrow are in my head. Or maybe the scenes I'm going to write next week, or maybe the scenes from a different chapter. I can't control it. But something starts filling my head and the characters start coming alive, and I start hearing snatches of dialogue, and I drift to sleep with Westeros and Ice and Fire in my head, haunting me." Again, that sounds so much like the tortured artist, tortured writer, but at the same time scares me because I've had good ideas, just ideas, before bed, and by the time I wake up, I either don't remember them or I only partially remember them. I remember the feeling of, oh, this is a good idea, and then it's completely lost. So maybe he's good at that. Maybe he's good at having an idea before bed, going to bed, and waking up with that idea still. Obviously, he's a different human being than I am, but I don't know, that's a little scary. If I were him, I would wake up or get out of bed immediately and start writing down those ideas, but that's not how he works. So I wonder how much he remembers of the night before and the dialogue and stuff. I don't know. Next, George admitted in this interview that, okay, yeah, having all these other projects that I'm working on has distracted me from the last 2 books of A Song of Ice and Fire. So he said on that, "The success of the show and the success of other things has injected a lot of other aspects into my life. So sometimes I lay in bed at night and I'm not thinking about Westeros. I'm thinking about some other problem I'm having, one of the other shows I'm involved with, or a deadline on an anthology I'm editing, or something that's happening with the nonprofit organization that I started. All these other things are filling my head, and that is one of the things that delayed me. I really have to get wins done. I have to put myself on a state where I'm not being distracted by other stuff. And that period of time at night is filled with the voices of Tyrion Lannister and Arya Stark and the other fictional characters who live inside of me." He expressed wishing that Game of Thrones and the success of his A Song of Ice and Fire series would have happened 30 years ago when he had more energy, because he admitted, yeah, at my age, I'm getting a little worn out. But he also promised, despite that, he has enough energy to complete a lot of different projects he wants to do. But he's also a lot less stressed now that the show is over, something he's been saying quite a bit since the end of the show, and here's something he said in that interview along those lines. "There was a period where the show caught and passed me, and I hadn't anticipated that happening, so there was a tremendous amount of stress on me a few years ago when that was about to happen, but hadn't happened yet, and I was desperately trying to finish wins and stay ahead. And it didn't work. The amount of stress that was on me at the time slowed me down rather than speeding me up. Now that the show's over, any stress in that regard is done. But of course, we have 5 successor shows in various stages of development. And one of them's just finished shooting the pilot episode in Northern Ireland, and another one's very close to getting a pilot order. I'm involved with those as well. Game of Thrones, that particular story, may be over on TV, but it's not over for me. I still have these 2 more books to write. And there's other stories in the world of Westeros, which is an entire world, and I'm still deeply involved with those. So believe me, there's plenty to keep me busy." Crossing my fingers for your good health, George. George also admitted that he is very blessed, but it's a mixed blessing, and he has the opposite of most authors who struggle to even get noticed. He said, "I do indeed have millions of people waiting for this book to come out, which is very gratifying, but some of them are extremely impatient, and some of them are full of their own ideas about the fates of the various characters. I'm glad they can get so emotionally involved with these characters, but sometimes I yearn for the days when I could just write in quiet obscurity. But those days are gone for me, I'm afraid. This is the reality of my life now." Which, let's be honest, no matter how well he ends the next 2 books in the A Song of Ice and Fire series, there are going to be people that are not happy with what he does, and they're going to tell us very loudly and for very long that they're not happy. He's never going to please 100% of the people, and the people he doesn't please, oh man, death threats everywhere. Alright, so there's your George update. Like, subscribe, and come back for more videos.